Hey everyone, and welcome to the Happily Ever After Hours podcast. My name is Colton Simmons. I'm a wedding photographer, and I had such a desire to put this podcast together because I feel like there's so many great people in the wedding industry and so much great information out there. And this podcast is going to serve as a home for all that information. So whether it's something that you want to learn from wedding planners, from videographers, we're going to share a lot of photography information throughout the course of this podcast. Well, not just this episode, but throughout each and every episode. But without further ado, today we are going to be having Brandon Moye on. And today we're going to talk about collaboration and the different things that wedding vendors do to prepare themselves to collaborate with each other to make sure that the wedding day goes smooth for the couples. And not only that, but share some of Brandon's story and how he, came to be as a wedding photographer, wedding videographer. So without further ado, here's Brandon Moye.
Hey, Colton, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem, man. Not a problem. I know it's peak wedding season kind of for us here, and we're in the trenches, but I appreciate you hopping on here. So yeah, like I was saying, explain to the audience who you are and how you got involved in wedding videography and videography in general.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brandon Moye. I'm a wedding videographer based in East Providence, Rhode Island. I'm just really glad to actually have an editing break to be able to hop on here with you, Colton. To be honest, it's just a lot of syncing footage, color grading, going back and forth with audio clips. So my start as a wedding videographer kind of started as I feel like a lot of people in our industry is just my hobby with making videos and a friend who had a wedding and needed someone to record. That's kind of how it started. But I guess for videography in general, it was actually back in college. I was actually doing free running and parkour at my college. And we were doing some commercial for like this local like eatery on campus. And they were wanting to like promote how close, fresh food is to campus. And so they're like, oh, let's get those free runner guys and like have them just like run over some like fresh produce. So they had like a videographer there and we kind of did this like, running through campus, hopping over stuff, handing it off to the next guy. They did like this relay. And so the guy was like, basically, long story short, I was like running across the street and this guy was like doing all this handheld. He was like running with me. And I remembered like he, after the shoot, he was like, yo, check this out. Like I went over to his place and he showed me the clip and it was like shaking around and everything. It looked kind of like an action scene. And then he was like, watch this. He hit render. And then it was like this super smooth, like shot. And I was like, how did that happen? Like my mind was like blown. Like nowadays it's like, anybody could do that with like, in body stabilization or whatever, these plugins. But for me, like that was like my first time seeing that happen. And I was like, man, I got to figure out how to do this. Like this would be great for like, all of our chase scenes and everything. So I took like an intro to film class and then like I loved it. Ended up switching majors to film studies. And then after that, I was just doing a lot of dance videos and music videos, a lot of just like creative stuff. And then I think a few years later, a friend of a friend was getting married back home in Georgia where my family lives. And they were like, oh, like if we pay for your flight back home to see your family, can you just like film our wedding? And I was like, yeah, sure. I want to go home to see my family. So that was kind of like my first experience shooting a wedding. I just remember giving them just like this huge, long, like just edited, I guess a lot of videographers call these like a doc edit, but it was like all the B-roll kind of mixed in with all like the main events, basically telling the whole story of the wedding day. I don't know if I'd ever create a film like that exactly now. It was so much work. And, but it was a fun experience. And I think from there, that's kind of where everything snowballed, just other friends hitting me up and then like friends of friends. And then like eventually I went from just doing that to actually advertising that I do weddings. And so I've been professionally doing weddings for about 6 or 7 years. And then I actually just went full time last year, which is kind of a big leap. I still kind of feel like, am I actually doing this thing? But
Yeah,
and loving every minute of it.
it's one of those things when you go full time where you're like, am I gonna, is this all gonna stop? Like, is the motion of this boat gonna just slow up and I'm gonna have to go back to my full-time job? But I would like to bring it back to something you said there. You said that you had a friend fly you back home. What year was this? And were you up in New England for school? Like, what brought you up into Rhode Island?
Yeah, so this was probably back in 2013. I think I just moved back up to Boston after going home after college. And so I just started my full time job. I think it was just like right after my internship turned full time.
Yep.
And so they were like, hey, like, you know, can you come down and film our wedding? And I had a little bit of gear, like just enough to kind of like get myself by. Like I would be like terrified to go into a wedding with the only like elements that I had. I think I had like a couple of audio recorders and like one camera. And I was trying to like hopefully try to do this like multicam thing. That's what I had like wanted to do. But yeah, so they were like, yeah, if, just come down, we'll fly you down. And that's kind of how that whole thing happened. Yeah.
Awesome. So, was this something where you did your first wedding and you're like, wow, I could really see myself doing this for a full-time job? Or was it something that gradually kind of happened as you were shooting and just kind of falling more in love with it?
Um, it was definitely like a more gradual burn for me because I think at first I was still very much in I want to really just kind of push my like creative ideas, like I want to light things this way and shoot things this way, do multiple takes, kind of create like this artistic vision. And I realize that with like live events like weddings especially, it's not so much about your creative vision, it's about the couple story. And so at the time, I was like, yeah, that first wedding was very much like, oh, friend of a friend, like, yeah, I know you. We've gone to parties before. Like, yeah, I'll definitely shoot this for you. But I think the more that I started to do the weddings and kind of get an eye for how to really help tell the couple story, it really helped to shift my own like creative brain to switch from like, oh, this is like my thing. This is my creative eye to how can I utilize that eye to help tell the couple story. So kind of very much switched to be more couple focused, I guess you could say. So I'd say like maybe after the a couple of years, I only did like maybe like one or two every year, those first couple of years. It's just like starting back in 2013. So I didn't really start doing it like more seriously until like 2016, 2017. But even then it was still like maybe, five or six a year. They were just like, again, like friends of friends or people who I danced with, who were on my dance team, and like maybe some of their friends. So that's kind of how I was getting like my initial like clients. And then like I started to like more seriously advertise like probably around like 2017, 2018.
Perfect. So, what would you say was like the pivotal point for you to go from it being this like friend of a friend thing to where you started getting leads that were outside of your friend group and you knew like, hey, this is something that I could take full time and have be what replaces my 9 to 5? And if you don't mind sharing, like, what were you doing for your 9 to 5 alongside the business as you were building it up?
Yeah. So my full-time job, which I'd had for almost 10 years now, was working at Boston Children's as an in-house videographer. So we did a lot of like talking head, kind of things just like this. We had multicam set up, a wide angle, close-ups on each of the speakers. If we're doing like an interview setup, if we had one, like maybe our chief of critical care would like interview like a guest speaker about a study that they did. And so they go into details about it. We'd add in like charts and graphs and post production and kind of do that. It was all very staged and very much just kind of like that, kind of corporate-ish healthcare education style video. And so I've been doing that for 10 years. And then on the side, I was always doing like the creative, music video, dance video, like it's kind of basically anything that I could get my hands on and just do for people in Boston. And I think that was kind of always just how I saw things continuing. Like this would just be my side hobby. But I think like 2018, I remember I did this wedding for some good friends of mine at the Boston Science Museum, and I don't know what it is. Like it was a day where like literally everything went wrong. I was on my way to the wedding, tire hit a curb, busted the tire. I'm like, okay, I can't even drive my car now. I had to like call an Uber, get all my stuff in the Uber, then go there. I started to get a migraine, so I'm getting like all these blind spots. I'm like, how am I gonna shoot a wedding film if like I basically can't even see? But
Yeah.
at that time, that was like after I finished editing the video and like saw what I created and saw like how much they loved it, and like I was really really super proud of this film. And I was like, it was kind of one of those films like eventually, I guess like maybe even 2020, 2021, it wasn't my best work at that
Yeah.
time, but I just couldn't take it down off my website. I was just, it had so much sentimental value, but that was kind of like that pivotal turning point for me where I was like, I definitely want to go like, as hard as I can into like wedding filmmaking, and really just like help create these stories. Cause I was just like so proud of what I did then. And, but I think going full time, I was still terrified. Like there's still kind of like that. This is what I want to do, but I don't think that I can actually make that full time leap right now, because it wasn't as consistent as I would need it to be able to like, I think, what we want to do, what we're able to financially do to support ourselves are like sometimes, conflicting things. But I was just kind of waiting for, I guess, for me to build up that clientele to be able to go full time, which I feel like I did find that starting last year. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
been amazing to see for the people who like slowly grinded for the last, 7 or 8 years to have that reprieve after things kind of opened back up after everything that happened in 2020 and 2021. I feel like that was the springboard for a lot of companies and a lot of businesses to be able to, quit their full-time jobs, myself included, to be able to go full-time with this. So it's definitely that like leap of faith that you take where you're like, am I making that right decision? Like,
Yeah.
you get that like few week period where leads aren't coming in and you question it, but just always staying true to the process, and it's like, I'm going to keep trucking along. And then sure enough, after that like week of or 2 weeks of heart attack like almost inducing stress, you're like, oh, I got 3 bookings at like my highest
Yeah.
package. So we're good here. It's definitely a not for the faint at hearted to be an entrepreneur, let alone a wedding industry entrepreneur. So, the one big thing that I really felt was a great thing to talk to you about. We've worked weddings together,
Mhm.
and the one thing that I find as a photographer is you got to have that sweet spot with a videographer. I know, at least for me, on my preferred videographers list, I I put like the videographers, even if maybe like they don't produce the most amazing wedding films, that they're going to put the couple's needs first and they're going to be the easiest to work with on a wedding day, because I feel like we're the two sets of people, unless they have a wedding planner that's with them all day, that we're with the couple all day throughout the entire day. So we don't, you know I've seen videographers that produce amazing work, but they're like very not people person, and they make the couples feel awkward. So, what would you say is like your keys to like being collaborative with photographers to make sure that things go well like on the wedding day? So like before we even get to the wedding day, like is there any communication that you try to do with other vendors prior to the wedding to make sure everything goes smoothly on the wedding day?
Yeah, so I think the biggest pillar is probably the most cliche to say, but it is communication. And again, it sounds cliche to say, but it is absolutely so important to make sure that you and like other vendors that you're going to be in contact with are on the same page. Um, so even beforehand, a lot of times, like I will reach out to, I guess the top three for videographers would be the planner if there is one, or like a coordinator or venue coordinator, just to make sure that like, okay, like, is there anything that we should know? Is there a timeline, or are there things like that? So depending on how involved the planner is, sometimes the planner setting up like, multiple calls before the wedding, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Or there are some who you don't speak to until like maybe the day before, just making sure that what time you come in tomorrow, just at least making sure that you're on the same page is like super, super important. The second person that I'll usually try to contact beforehand is the DJ or the band. Just because for video, audio is like probably the most important thing, which is, for some people, may be surprising, but they say audio is half the picture when it comes to making a film, and that is because making sure you have good audio, especially when you're thinking about the vowels. If there's a first look, I always usually try to mic up, grooms for the first look. So like all those little intimate moments can be recorded, and those don't always make the highlight film, but it's something I do like to just deliver to the couples in its entirety, because it's such an intimate moment, like right before they're getting married. It's like the last time they're alone together, essentially. So saying all that, I do reach out to the DJ or the kind of like the coordinator of the band to say,
Yeah.
hey, I'm gonna need to patch in, just to make sure like I can get quality audio. And I make sure to mention that, it's not just me wanting to, I want to record like your mix. So like I have one DJ who was like so paranoid that I wanted to record like the way he mixed and like put it up on like SoundCloud or something. I'm like, listen, that means nothing to me. I need to make sure the couple gets like the highest quality audio for like the film that I'm delivering to them. So I always make sure to
Yeah.
mention that it's for the couple, and that it's for the deliverable that I'm
Yeah.
giving to them.
That's super
Um,
important because I mean, I've seen newer videographers that don't think of these things, and it comes time we're like 10 minutes before the reception, I'm getting my lighting set up, making sure everything that I have good is good, and then they're like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what I'm going to do. The DJ doesn't have a plug-in for me to put my Zoom recorder on. Like I don't know how I'm going to get audio for the speeches. And I think of just like having worked with you, I've seen like in the past, like you always have like a wireless recorder on your wrist in the case you need to like strap that up to a microphone in the case that you did talk to the DJ but they don't have a plug-in, and always
mhm.
having backup. So what would you say is like important, because in terms of like having backups in these collaborative situations where a DJ doesn't have a place for you to plug in, like how important is that for you?
So it's interesting because it's like one of the first things I do when I set up for any main event is make sure the audio is set. Um, because you're recording B-roll throughout the entire day. Like worst case scenario, you hit record, on your recorder, you have a mic that's already running. You could put B-roll over something and at least be able to have like that audio. Like, but that's um, like you need that quality audio. So like
Yeah.
all of my cameras, obviously they record audio, but then I usually try to put like a better quality mic, like a shotgun mic, on top of that, just to have that be like, just a step up in quality. So like worst case scenario, all 17 of my audio recorders like die at the same time. I still have like a little better quality audio on my cameras. But yeah, so I'll plug into the DJ's board with like, and again, I think with experience, I have had to make sure I have like multiple different types of cables, because some DJs are like, oh, I don't have an XLR. I only have an RCA, because they have a system from like, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I have like, an adapter to plug into my system. So I make sure that I have backups. So like you mentioned, that recorder on my wrist, a lot of times something will happen last minute and it's like, oh, I'd love to record this. Boom, I can pull that off my wrist. I don't even know, do I have that here? Usually I have it here. Actually, yeah, I do. This little Rode recorder. So I'll just have that on my wrist. I'll pull it off. I'll wrap this around the mic. So whenever someone's speaking into the mic, they're also speaking directly into this. So that's a great like backup source for me. So I'll have a feed from the mic. I'll have a feed from that's on there. I'll have it's just making sure you have backups again, because technology is great until it's not, or it doesn't work or something fails, but you have
Yeah.
those backups and those fail safes, which is like super important. Um, so yeah, it's yeah. But I did want to get back to, the third person who I also want to make sure I coordinate with, which is pretty obvious for you, the photographer, because I think that's the person, like you mentioned, like we're there with the couple like pretty much the entire day.
Yeah.
And making sure that we're on the same page for how we're going to cover those main events is like super important. A lot of times I do work with a lot of the same people, and so I kind of know how they work, or I've at least seen the work and know that they, I've seen behind the scenes, like I know they know how to handle themselves. And so it's usually like okay, like, hey, walk into the room on the day of, and like, okay, like what are you going to do for the ceremony, da da da. We can like bang that out in like 2 minutes, and it's perfectly fine. But making sure we have that point of contact at least some point is like very important, just so we're not in each other's way. Yeah.
Definitely. And I know that like with the videographers that I work with a lot, my friends at Sojourner Media, that we tend to like work a lot of weddings together.
Mm.
And it's almost to the point now where if there's no wedding planner, they're going to come to me and they're like, hey, I know you have the timeline. Like, we're going to just kind of piggyback what you've already done. So there's like levels of trust, which I think is super important when you're building your preferred vendor list and you're giving it to clients, because you want to make sure that like everything's cohesive, even if you're not a company that works together, that you, or you know, you're not the same company, I should say. The DJ is different from the videographer is different from the photographer, but we all kind of gel together as like one unit for the couple on the wedding day. Because I feel like what can happen is that ego gets in the way a lot in this industry. And my biggest thing is like trying to like break that all down before the wedding, be like, hey, like this is about the couple, it's not about us, you know. At the end of the day, we're all going to be able to get the things that we need to get done. So is there anyone else that you reach out to prior to the wedding day to communicate with, to make sure everything's good before the wedding?
Prior to the wedding, those are probably my three top people. Like there have been times where I've talked to, an officiant, because of, or like someone who works at the church because the church is super old and like, hey, I need to make
Hmm.
sure that I can plug into like this old Catholic church, and like they're like, oh, sound system, we don't have one of those, and so you're like, okay, let me try to figure out how to, you know, I'll put like one of those mics that I just showed you, kind of like in, the flower arrangements that's going to be up there, like, or like also have one on the groom. So of course it's like making sure I have again those backups in place. But aside from those one-offs, those are probably like the main people that I'll talk to, because again, it's kind of like we're all super busy, and I feel like I try to make those like points of contacts as like, on a like need to need basis, instead of just like, hey, I'm just gonna give me your entire vendor list so I can just call everybody like, hey, I'm the videographer, let me know what's if you need anything. So I do try to keep it to people that I really need to speak to. But again, that pre-wedding communication is super important.
Definitely. So, now we've kind of covered the basis of like you've gotten everything that you need to going up to the day of the wedding. You're at the wedding. What is your biggest like takeaway from the wedding day in terms of just coordinating with people, and like what's your process in terms of like how you handle the day to make sure that everyone's on the same page, especially if you're working with like a newer uh, photographer that you haven't worked with before, or maybe you're working with a band you've never worked with before? Like, what are some steps you do throughout the day to make sure that just like you're on the same page with everyone?
So the biggest thing is rapport. I think from the moment, like if you're doing getting ready coverage, the moment you like knock on the door and that door opens, like the switch turns on and it's like it's game time. And like
Yeah.
your first impression on the bridal party, on the photographer who's there, the coordinators in the room, like just building up that rapport from like the get go to like show like, hey, you know, I'm here for the couple. Like we're gonna have a great time. It's a time to celebrate. I'm not coming in there like, okay, you guys need to move this over here. I need my lighting this way. Like if it's not my show.
Yeah.
I am privileged to be a part of the show that's happening. And I think just going in with that mindset, it's like I am so I'm so privileged to like be able to work with these vendors, to work with this couple, and to be a part of their special day. Like there are, you think about, people who've been like dreaming of like the moment their child is born, like thinking about what their wedding day might be like. And this is like 25 years later, like they've been thinking about this day for 25 years. And I'm not just going to show up and be like, yeah, no, we're not going to do this because I need, my artistry says this and that. And I need to have this. It's like, no, it's not your day. Like it's your profession. Bring your professionalism to the table, but it's still their show. And I think that's like the first thing that on the wedding day I make sure to do is to like say, hey, like, do you need me to help you set up this flat lay? Do you need me to move stuff out of the way? Can I move this chair for you? It's like, hey, I want to be of service to the photographer. Like I want to make sure that they know that I'm here for the couple. I'm here for them. hey, do you need me to grab some BTS? Of like, I know Colton, even for you, our last wedding together, like you went over to show Taylor like the pictures. I'm, oh, I got to get this. Like, so you show her, she's like, oh my gosh, like she see, like you just see that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm providing, you know, value for you. This is like, let me be here for you as well. Like we're all in this like collaborative environment, and just like me doing that, it's like, oh wow, like I feel refreshed. Like
Yeah.
you, like I tell you afterwards, oh I got that for you. Like oh yeah, like it's like we're like it kind of gives you that little boost of energy when like you've been shooting for you know 7 8 hours, and it's like oh yeah, hey I got this for you. Oh wow, that's great. Yeah, we are a team. We are working together, and
Yeah.
kind of just you know you're not just feeling like oh man, how much longer am I here for? Like it kind of just helps to build that energy and build that community on the day.
Definitely. And you touched on something that's like super huge to me. And it's the fact that every relationship that we have, both personally and professionally, I think it's just a good way to live your life if you're always trying to figure out how you can out add value to the relationship. So not like, oh, I'm just going to outdo Brandon just to do it. But like my biggest thing is like, how can I like have this conversation with Brandon and he walks away with value? I do that with couples, like with my initial phone calls with them. Have them walk away from that phone call with something they didn't have before. And that's not just like my pricing. And, you know, I give them physical timelines on their initial calls. So it's like those little things that I do in my life, I've noticed come back full circle. And if the wedding industry was a lot like that more, and I think it's growing into that. I feel like when I first got into the industry, I don't know if you felt this way, but there was like a lot of like gatekeeper like energy in the sense of like there was wedding planners that worked with specific photographers at specific venues, and the only way you worked at those venues or with that wedding planner was if you were that photographer or you worked with
Mm,
their second shooter, or vice versa when it comes to DJing and videography. So the biggest thing for me is always trying to just add value to conversations, add value to vendors, which is why when I get the couple their preview the next day, I'm reaching out to the makeup artist, I'm reaching out to the hairstylist, I'm reaching out to the florist, everyone that had a part to do in that wedding, and giving them the previews along with the couples, because I wouldn't have that preview to give had I not had somebody who designed the florals in the way
yeah.
that the florist did and all those things. So to me, that's like that overarching feeling of collaboration on the wedding day, is that we're all coming together, and like you said, we're you know working on a mother's 25-year plan of getting her daughter married, and like she's investing all this money in her child to have that special day for her, but it's also a special day for them too. So we should be
Mhm.
making sure we're being what I like to call all things to all men.
Yeah.
Um, so or women. I'm not being sexist there, I promise.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so you show up, you're trying to get everyone, to see that you're on the same page. So obviously there's some tricky times throughout the wedding day when it comes to ceremonies in very tight places. And what's your course of action of like communicating with maybe the photographer or the officiant before the ceremony to be like, hey, this is what I need for my setup, and how can we work this together to make sure everything goes smoothly and we both get the shots we need? Because I feel like when I started in the wedding industry, I was doing videography and then I transferred over to photography. So I understand it from both like sides of the aisle. And I feel like when I first started out, there was just times where like photographers acted like they were the only ones that mattered and they would get in the way of my shots. And it was kind of a way of like looking at how I would develop my business once I got into the industry as a photographer, that I wouldn't do that same thing to videographers. So, how do you handle those types of situations when you're maybe dealing with a personality who doesn't want to work on the same page as you when it comes to sharing space during the ceremony?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think you do have to make sure that you're like ultimately going to give the couple what you said you're going to give the couple. Um, but at the same time, like they also have to give the couple what they said they're going to give the couple. And so I think the ceremony is honestly like the highest point of contention between a lot of photographers and videographers. I've been a part of, Facebook groups, and like, oh, you see this post, oh, look at this guy in the aisle, and it's like a photographer, chilling in the middle of the aisle, and it's this whole videographer thread, and everyone's like, how could they, how could, and I'm like, and like some of the more seasoned ones in the group are like, well, how are they going to get their shot? They have to get the center aisle shot like that. They need their wide shot. Like what? So I think it's making sure that everyone can get what they need to get. So like for me, I have 2 cameras on the side of the aisle shooting, telephoto in at, each person getting married. And then I have the wide, and then I have my gimbal. So it's like, yeah, sure, if they're in my safety angle, they're getting their shot. And so then I'll make sure that I can just cut to another camera. That's just kind of the nature of the day. The important thing I think on the front end of that is before the ceremony even starts, when you talk with the photographer, hey, processional's happening. That's probably the most pivotal point of the ceremony is getting that reaction of the bride coming down. Where are you going to be? And I know I guess like 9 times out of 10, a lot of photographers I've worked with are kind of like up at the front, opposite, the groom or the person waiting for their partner coming down. And then they're shooting up at the bride, shooting up at the person so they can get their angle. So it's like, okay, I know where they're going to be. I'll make sure not to be at the top of the aisle, getting like next to the bride, shooting it like, why would I be there? Because then I'm in their shot, they're in my shot, nobody's getting the shot. But if you're both next to each other, you're both getting the shot, then the couple gets the video of that angle, they get the photos of that same angle. It's like, you're getting that mutual coverage. Nobody's in each other's shots. I think if you know that ahead of time, you can plan for it. And I think that's super important. So sometimes I'll talk to the officiant and say, hey, I have a mic for you. I know you're going to be speaking into the microphone. The microphone is for everybody else to hear what you have to say. This microphone is for the video that I'm delivering to the couple. So it could be a really nice and crisp audio for them to have for their wedding ceremony video. And again, I always make sure to reiterate, this is not because I just want to mic you up to make myself feel like, oh, look at all these mics I have. No, this is for the couple. This is all for their deliverable, so they can have quality audio recording. So mine is internal. The other mic from the DJ or from whoever is for everybody else to hear. So they okay, now I get it. Yeah, I understand. So like I've seen that happen, like that register once I explain it all the time with, different officiants, or if it's like a friend who's officiating for them, then they're, okay, now I understand. And so now they're on board, they're on page. It's not just like, I already have a mic, I don't want this. Now they get it, we're good. So again, communicating beforehand, then everybody knows what's going on. But again, I do make sure I have those extra mics because, who knows, they might rustle it or take it off, or, you never know. So, yeah.
Definitely. And I think, something that, sorry about that, that speaks to what you're saying here is a lot of that comes from experience. You've been doing this now for almost 10 years, if not about the 10-year mark with you starting in 2013. There is a lot that you learn throughout the years. And when I hear you speak, I hear someone speaking from experience. And I just remember a wedding that I had done a few years ago. I remember talking to the videographers when they first arrived throughout the day. They were like, we do a lot of music videos. This is actually like my first wedding that I'm filming. So, for me, I already registered like, okay, I'm going to have to kind of like guide them through some things that they're doing here to make sure that, the couple gets everything captured. And for me, I'm thinking, again, collaboratively, I'm thinking about, okay, the couple paid them to do their job. I want to be able to give them as much insight that I can without seeming like I'm trying to be a know-it-all, trying to find that fine line. But then we get to the ceremony and everything goes off without a hitch. They've been doing like a great job, kind of like giving them some pointers of things throughout the day. And the officiant goes to announce them husband and wife, and out of like nowhere, behind this like floral on the backside of the venue, we're in Ocean Cliff. So they're like, there's the florals are set up and then there's the window. So I'm like not really seeing things because light's coming through, and the couple go in for a kiss, and this videographer just pops out from behind the floral into the back of the first kiss shot. And luckily, like I just pivoted and kind of like leaned over like a guest that was like in the aisle, and I kind of got it off center, which, I got the shot, but everything was all said and done. And I thought about it and I was like, man, like I gotta, let them know, like, hey, like I'm super cool, I'm super chill about things, like, but if you might have been working with another photographer that isn't as like, wanting to help you along, like what you did was like an issue because you got in the back of like that shot. And it was a real good learning moment for them. It was a good learning moment for me to not be that photographer that was going to be like, I can't believe you got into the back of that shot. And, because at the end of the day, it already happened. That like there's nothing we could do. The bride's going to be understanding because at the end of the day, she hired a videographer that she knew didn't do weddings and was
Hmm.
hiring them for that. So, with all that being said, are there times where you find that you're working maybe with a photographer that it's might be their first or second wedding, and you find yourself in that similar position where you're like helping them along without being like the know-it-all? Um, at this point, we're millennials, and the Zoomers are getting into the the industry. So,
Yeah. I think for me, because I think so, I'm thinking of a situation, and I think it kind of comes down to kind of like me being prepared through experience. A lot of things that I do now are because I messed up or didn't do it before and had to pay for it and had to figure out how can I fix this, like in post or do something different. So, you know, working with an inexperienced photographer or even a photographer who's experienced but they don't do a lot of weddings. I think I was working with one before. And I'm trying to, as I tell the story, make sure I'm not identifying anything. But um, so it was one where they kind of weren't trying to be too adventurous with a lot of their ceremony coverage. They're just getting everything from the center of the aisle, which means one of my safety angles is like, completely shot. Like if they're going to be in the aisle the entire time,
mhm.
that means I kind of had to be, a little more creative with how I capture things. I think at the time I may not have had my full like four camera setup. I think I do four, or I do three with my when I'm a solo shooter. I do four or five sometimes. When I have I do like my higher collections. And so I think for that one it was just myself. So I had to figure out how to make sure I can get like my center angle. So it's just kind of like adapting, like you said, when you leaned over to make sure you got that videographer out of the shot. I was like, well, I'll just bring the camera up and and hold it, do it handheld, and just stand next to them, so that way they can get the shots that they were getting because they were just standing there in the middle the whole time. Just, shot, 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 shot. So I'm like, I can't have it at the back of the aisle where I would have
Yeah.
usually had it. So I just grabbed it and moved it up and did handheld. So I was just here. So I knew when I was doing my multicam edit, I could just cut back and forth between these. And then when I wanted to move up, I would just, move up. I cut to another angle while I moved up, and then I switched back whenever I needed. So it's kind of, as long as I'm prepared, maybe that meant I couldn't be as adventurous myself for the ceremony coverage. But again, it's kind of still working with, the working at the level that, that photographer was. I'm not going to say, hey, maybe you should try to go get this, or maybe you should do that. I'm not there to direct them. I'm letting them do their thing, but I'm just kind of, working around them and still making sure I can deliver, a quality product to the couple. So, yeah.
Definitely. So, one thing that makes me think of, right? So, we all have our own like creative styles.
Mhm.
So you film your films in a certain way that you have a shot list in your head, and you're like, I want to get some movement with the couple. I want to, do X, Y, and Z with the couple. What do you do on a day where maybe a photographer, like you said, isn't as adventurous? Like not just, they're standing in the aisle, but maybe they only do like, they're not that experienced. They're not getting a lot of different poses. Do you like, is there a point during like maybe the couple portraits where you say, hey, like I'd like to try this and this with the couple, maybe you could get some shots of me while I'm doing this, just to kind of not like take over, because I don't want to say that like the photographer is the leader during those moments. I always try to be very collaborative myself during that. I'm always looking over at you. Hey, is there something that you want to get next or anything like that? What do you do in a situation like that where where the photographer maybe not producing the shots that you would need for your work? Like, how do you go about managing that?
Um, I think again, going back to communicating beforehand. So if we're going into a portrait session, let's say it's after the first look, or going out for a sunset session, I think first of all, knowing the timeline, let's when are the points we're going to be with the couple. And so if that first time is the first look, like, hey, we're walking over to the first look location. Hey, once we're done, like I'd love to just get, a few shots of the couple walking. Like I have like a list of shots that I'd love to do. If I'm working with a photographer who has that sort of style, like I love Candace, I love, having him twirl her, kind of, I'd love to get them walking too, maybe along the beach side or whatever. Then I'm like, okay, that's great. I can kind of let them run through their shot list and making sure I'm not in their way. I'm not being obtrusive, and I can kind of shoot over their shoulder. So that way we're both getting what we need. I have had, photographers who like, maybe needed to like take a second, like, oh, like my battery's like running low. Can you just like take over real quick? So then that's an opportunity for me to step in and then say, hey, let's get some moving shots. Let's do this and do that. I don't call attention to that, but I'm just like, hey, I just want to get a couple of shots real quick. Can I just get this with you guys? And then so then I do that, and then the photographer does their card switch or battery switch, whatever. So again, it's kind of just like making sure, like, hey, that, we're just kind of keeping things moving along. Um, but yeah, it's once you communicate that ahead of time, I think usually things work out pretty well. But if it is a photographer who does like the very like, we're doing like, we're doing the pose, and it's very still. And it's, oh, let me move your hand here. Let's move it 3 degrees to this. Okay, get the fingers right. Move the ring, and it's like very like static.
Yeah,
Sometimes it can be a little tricky because in those moments, for a video, like they're getting that photo. Like they don't want a photo in a video necessarily. So maybe I'll just, I'll creep in and just get like a close up of that ring. Like, I'll zoom in and get a close up of that ring. So I can use that as kind of like, additional B-roll while they're getting that like setup portrait or
definitely.
whatever. So it's kind of, maximizing my time. So then like when it does come time to, okay, like we're going to move locations, I'm like, perfect. As we're moving, I'm going to get these moving shots now. So then, it's kind of like they have to walk anyway. So I was like, hey, Colton, can we actually have them go in front of us so that I can get them from behind, walking, holding hands as we're going to the next location. So we're maximizing that time. And then you'll be like, oh, hey, let me get that shot too. So then, we're kind of just, we're moving, we're maximizing time. We're all getting shots. And then it kind of just keeps things moving along pretty smoothly.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely love it when it almost feels like a flow state when I'm working with a videographer, and it's like I know they're getting the shot, and then they're, like you said, like I think when we were out with Taylor and Justin on the dock, you're like, have them walk that way, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's a great idea. I'm gonna just go off and get the side angle while you get that straight on shot while they walk down the dock, and it creates a bunch of variety where I would say, like, if you're a photographer listening to this or a videographer listening to this, just like think about just being as collaborative as possible with the other person on the day of the wedding, and just like take the side roll for a second and see what that might produce in your work. It'll allow you to see things differently than you normally do. Like I tell my second shooters all the time, I'm like, get prime lenses, because with a zoom lens, you're not moving your feet. So you're not seeing things from different angles than you normally would. When you have a prime lens, you have a 50 millimeter on. In order for you to get that wide shot, you got to take a 15, 20-foot step back. And when you do that, you might see another area that you didn't even know was available for portraits. So that's a great thing I feel like about that collaborative process, is being able to see things from new angles. And not only that, but just like for me, I get the satisfaction knowing that the couple is getting that shot for their video, because to me, like, we're putting together a tapestry. The florist did their flowers, like I did my photo, you do your video, and this all comes back together on, the day that they finally have all of their deliverables from both of us. And they're like,
Mhm.
whoa, like we're like re-immersed in the wedding day. And I think that's super important. And if I do something that's going to hinder that for a videographer, I didn't do my job correctly.
Mhm.
And that's something that needs to be stressed more than anything, because like it's like we said, it's not about the ego. It's about making sure that our couples are happy. And you never want your couple to like talk to their videographer and be like, hey, like, how come we didn't get that shot where we were twirling and the Newport Bridge was behind us? And the videographer have to be like, well, your photographer was standing in the way the whole time. And then right when they were done with that shot, they didn't ask if I needed to get that shot and just moved you guys on to the next thing. So
Mhm.
that's why, like I said, at the end of every time I do like a setup with a couple, I'll look over my shoulder. I'll be like, hey, Brandon, do you need this? Or are you good with what we already got? Because I don't want to move them and then have to go because a lot of times, like, we have 15 minutes for sunset.
Yeah, that's
To
true.
reset somebody back up in a minute is a minute worth of photos we, didn't get. And sometimes, at that
Time
point,
is precious.
the couple is already like the groom's like on a leash to the bar, and he's like, I want to get back in there and get another drink, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So uh yeah, I think that's super huge. And one thing I also wanted to touch on is, how do you manage clients' expectations going off of what I just said? Like, you weren't able
Yeah.
to get that shot because the photographer didn't like make room for you. Like, what do you do going into the wedding day? Like, a lot of times couples will be like, oh, I have this videographer. Have you ever worked with him before? And usually a lot of times I always try to like insert like you or like, the other video, like I insert all the videographers that I'd want to be there when the couple's
Mhm.
in that decision phase. Because I just feel like a lot of times it's usually the photographer that gets booked and then the videographer. So
Yeah.
what do you do in a situation where you've never like worked with a photographer and a couple's like having that conversation with you like, hey, this is who we have for our photographer, and you've never worked with them? Like, how do you manage their expectations to make sure that they know that you're going to get the job done while also working alongside with this brand new photographer that you're not brand new in the industry, but brand new to working with you?
Right, right. Well, I will say one thing to that last point before we move on, because if there are any like, videographers listening, or I know a lot of, there are a lot of teams out there of like, photo, video, people who do both. So maybe in that case, you're used to it, but, make sure you speak up, because there are times in the past where I definitely did not. I'm like, this is the photographer show. They hired them first. This is their blah, blah, blah. This is their vision. I'm just here to get, pieces of the portrait session as I can. I'm like, oh, that's such a cool setup. Oh, and then, okay, we're going to move. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'm not getting that. I'm just kind of just like defeated. Well, I guess we won't get that shot. I just kind of just mosey along.
Yeah.
But just like speaking up and just saying, oh, hey, before we go, can I just grab this really quickly? And making sure like your settings are right. So you can get it very quickly and just get that set up. Get that setup that you wanted. Because I feel like 9 times out of 10, every time I've ever spoken up about something I wanted to get before moving on, before changing poses or whatever, it's been like such a great a shot that I've like loved. And there's a reason why I wanted to get it. Like I'm like, oh wait, just speak up. Like, hey, can I quickly get this? And just make sure you speak up. So I just wanted to say that to anybody listening.
Definitely. And I
The next
think,
time, like you're gonna go shoot, and that feeling, you feel that feeling. The worst they can do is say, "Oh no, we don't have time." At least you spoke up. But a lot of times, you will get that shot, and you'll be so thankful that you did.
too, to speak to that, the couple would then look at you and if they're expecting like a video version of that, and they, and you like came back and you're like, well, the photographer moved on, like they would probably look at you and be like, hey, well, we hired you to like do this. Like you should have just spoken up, So
Mhm.
kind of to piggyback off what I originally asked, like, what do you do prior to the wedding to kind of, manage clients' expectations and know what you're going to get them as a deliverable with that variable of having someone you've never worked with before being in the mix?
Yeah. So it's. I think one thing that the timeline does play a huge role, especially if there's a coordinator. A lot of times, I think most times, a lot of the great photographers I worked with do come up with the timeline, and then it kind of just gets tweaked as needed from there. And by the way, Colton makes great timelines. Thank you so much for all the timelines you've created, Colton. But I even like, I had a call yesterday, day before yesterday, a check-in for a wedding next month. And so, it was me, the couple, and the planner. And so we're looking at the timeline. And so there were essentially, I guess, three main times where we would have the couple. The first was the first look. But outside of the first look, there was technically only 15 minutes where it's just a couple. And then that time would end 15 minutes before the ceremony starts. But for a videographer, usually I tell all my couples I need 30 minutes before the ceremony. Because again, I have to set up all my audio sources because that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Tripods, camera angles, all of that. Settings, match, sunk, all that. I say 30 minutes. A lot of time, like a wedding I did last Saturday, I got everything done in like probably 7 minutes because I was flying. But I say
Yeah.
30 because sometimes, it is a larger, group of people at the wedding. So you have to put the tripod all over here and another one way over here. The person's way in the back doing audio, so they have to go plug in. So I just give myself that 30 minutes. So, and I'm looking at this timeline and I'm like, ceremony's at 4:30. We're going to get done with the portrait session at 4:15. We're going to start at 4 after bridal party, after family, and then and I'm like, we're going to be 5 minutes behind maybe. I'm not really going to have that time. I can't count on that time. I'm not going to say we're not
Yeah.
going to have it, but I can't count on it. But they're like, oh no, we have, sunset. We're going to get sunset photos. Yeah, it's going to be so great, so great. And I'm like, well, I've been in plenty of overcast weddings where like the sunset doesn't happen, like it's just cloudy. And then sometimes a couple doesn't want to go to sunset. And then this couple also stressed they wanted to be at the entire cocktail hour. So those would have been the 3 times: sunset, cocktail hour, like right after a ceremony, and then
Yeah.
that first look time. So I'm like, sunset may not happen. 15 minutes of that first look time. And then they don't want to do a portrait session after the ceremony because they want to be at the cocktail hour. So when am I going to get this portrait in if there's no sunset? So, I was just like, this all happened like in a matter of like 2 seconds. I'm like thinking about this as they're saying, oh yeah, sunset would be fine, da, da, da. So I'm like, oh yeah, well, I do want you to enjoy cocktail hour because again, that's what the couple said that they wanted to do. You need to prioritize what they want, not what I want. It's not about me. It's not my show.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, I want you to enjoy cocktail hour too. Maybe if we do have a quick 5 minutes after the ceremony, maybe I can just grab you guys as you guys are getting, settled after the ceremony. Your emotions are swirling. I'll just grab a couple of candids of you guys. It'll be really quickly, no problem. If not, it's fine. But I needed to make sure that if they want to enjoy cocktail hour, yeah, I can get plenty of stuff of you at cocktail hour. We'll get a lot of candids. It'll be a lot, kind of letting them know that this highlight film is going to be a lot of just, dance party footage, cocktail hour footage, a lot of just the people that they love being in the highlight film, as opposed to, all these beautiful, just like couple portrait sessions, because that's what the timeline is kind of presenting itself to be. And if I do get those sunset shots, that's just icing on the cake. That's just extra. That'll be perfect at that point in time. So it is kind of ahead of time, looking at the timeline, seeing what's going to be possible, what's practical. And then, maybe putting the idea in their head that maybe we can get these other things, but make sure that the expectation is set that, okay, because of this timeline, because of what your preferences are, this is what we're going to probably be looking at for the highlight film. And oh yeah, that's great. That'll be fine. So then that's there, that's done. A lot of times I record my interactions with the couples and clients
Yeah.
with us, just so that if there were to be, and I haven't had that happen before, because again, I do, in these conversations, I do make things clear. But just in case a client afterwards like, well, there's like no portraits of us, like we don't have any, like it's our wedding. And I'm like, oh well, you said you wanted to prioritize a cocktail hour, you wanted to prioritize these other things, and that's what I did for you because you said that. And so usually that would be fine. But again, it's making sure like the film that I create is about, and this is what I tell every couple, the film is about them and their relationship. It's about their wedding and their celebration. And then it's about their expectation for the wedding film, like the type of film that they want to have. So
Definitely.
those are like the 3 core elements of what I explain to every couple, is like what makes up their film, and why all my films look a little bit different from one another, because it's not just like a cookie cutter, like all the color looks like this, all this looks like that. You're going to get this, that, and like I want it to be something that represents them and their style and their relationship. And so it is kind of setting that expectation on the front end, so everyone knows
Definitely.
what's going to happen. Yeah.
And it's important that you say that, because I think back to a wedding in particular that I'm not going to go into too much detail about. But it was one that I learned a huge mistake, and I didn't give my client the right expectations going into it. And we're talking this whole podcast about collaborating with other vendors, but the most important people that we need to be collaborating with throughout the wedding is the couple. And it comes down to like, what is it that you expect from your wedding photographer? What is it that you expect from your videographer? What is it that you expect from your DJ, so that I can be those things? And even before you've signed the papers and gotten that client book, that they know well ahead of time, like, this is what they're getting with you, and that there's no boxes unchecked. Because in the one time that I did not do that in my career, it definitely put me in a very awkward situation with a couple who expected X, Y, and Z. But because I didn't clearly say, the timeline, like you said, doesn't allow for this, and this is what you're going to be able to get from your wedding day, it came back as pie in my face. So that's why, it's one of the things that I do with couples from the very first call before you've even booked, is we get like a timeline jotted down. And to bounce back off of what you said earlier, is I always try to lean on the side of I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I always pad my timelines with, like 5 minutes in each section, so that for some reason, if, somebody had an issue with hair and makeup and they wanted the hairdresser to fix something, and that pushes everybody else's timeline back for the rest of the day. I have time to make up with things. Like even when we worked on Taylor and Justin's wedding,
Mhm.
the transportation didn't pick them up from the hotels, so they didn't get to the venue you know
Oh yeah.
until 15 minutes later than they were supposed to. But because I worked, obviously working with Pearl and everyone at Design by Delsey, that there was such a great team that they already had the timeline
Amazing.
locked down in a way that I was able to make up the time when it came to, moving maybe faster through family portraits or through the
Mhm.
wedding party portraits, to be able to get their timeline caught back up and to be able to meet the expectations of what I said that I was going to deliver to them. So
Right.
it's definitely super important to make sure that the communication with the couple is fluid and constant as much as you need to be. Like they're planning a wedding, they're dealing with like maybe somewhere in the ballpark from 8 to 12 vendors. Like you said, to reaching out to vendors at the beginning of this for what you do, like we don't need to bombard them with emails like throughout the process. If they have questions, they're going to ask it. But to just make sure, like, maybe you notice that for instance, I had a couple that's getting married at Kirkbray in August, and they just had a fire in their kitchen. So immediately, what I do is I reach out to her and I say, "Hey, I'm so sorry to hear about the fire. It looks to seem as though in the next few months everything will be okay with that venue to have your wedding there in August. Please let me know if there's anything that I can do to help you, and just keep me posted throughout the process so that I know how to shift things in the case that maybe we have to move to a new venue, or maybe we're going to target a new date because the venue's not going to be ready in time." So those things
Mhm.
I feel like are very, very important when it comes to, staying in collaboration with the most important people at the wedding, which is the couples. So I just want to touch on one last thing before we wrap up here, and that is what happens after everything's all said and done. So the wedding day is done. Maybe it's the next day, and I've gotten the preview put together for a couple, and I'm posting on social media, or you're getting a highlight video done. How important is it to you after the wedding to continue to collaborate with vendors? For me, I feel like that has been the biggest thing for me to grow my business, is to make sure that I'm like sending out, like I said earlier, all the previews to all the vendors that, I never really send photos to the videographer unless I grab like some photos of them, because most of the time it's not like they're gonna find any use of like the photos, just like I wouldn't find any use of, like, maybe like, at least for me, maybe I would like take B-roll of like the bride walking and make an Instagram reel with it if that was something that you wanted to share with a photographer. But I'm always sharing with everyone else, and then I'll like tag everyone in my posts. Do you find that like you find a lot of success in your business when you collaborate beyond the wedding day with vendors?
Um, I would say so, and I think that's probably the weakest link for me in terms of my business is kind of the back end. Um, I mean, anyone who follows me knows that I'm pretty much a ghost on social. So I don't post a lot, but I will say, before I completely answer that, to the point about receiving photos from as a videographer from the photographer, there have been I even got photos of a sneak peek from a wedding from last weekend, and honestly, it was just really good to see how the photos came out. Just even, I think it's just part of just kind of building that rapport. It's like, oh wow, they thought of me, and I was a second shooter at this wedding. And it was just really good to see kind of how the photos came out, and it's just kind of like, again, just kind of like the community building. And I was like, yo, checking in with that photographer. Oh, hey, photos are great. And so me, the first videographer, commenting and stuff now, because we're all kind of like giving them. Or going to their page and giving them some interaction and engagement. But there was one wedding, I think it was back early summer of 2022, and I got photos from the photographer, and I saw, so there were some of them, some of me in those photos. Oh, great, these are great. I put some of those on my website. I captioned the photographer and everything. They're great candidates of me. But then what I did see in there were some photos, and I could see some of my gear in the way during the processional, and I was like kind of horrified because I was like, oh, I can't believe that was still in a shot. And it was like all throughout the processional, you could see it just kind of in the corner. Maybe nobody else noticed it. They're all focused on the people. I'm looking at, oh wow, I could see part of my,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, oh man. And like ever since then, I've been so diligent about like not putting my stuff in like certain areas throughout the day because I'm, oh, that might be in the background, that might be in the background. So I think even just like on the back end, like that was something that really helped me out, just like knowing, okay, this is something that may end up in the photos. I don't want it there. So that kind of helped me out. So that's kind of like an aside. But I think, I don't know, like I feel like making sure that, one of the things that I get from couples is like their entire vendor list. And like I have notes from like all my consults and stuff. So I'll have like that ready. So whenever I do post a wedding, I can just like copy that, posted in there. So I have like every single like from transportation to floral to photographer venue, like everything. I just have it all listed there. I could tag them in all the posts. And so it's kind of like, yeah, so now they get to see like the finished product of all their hard work and how they contributed to the wedding. Like in my post, and I'm getting engagement. And then they can post it to their stories and I comment on that. And then it's just kind of like adding the flow and we're kind of re-engaging and it's kind of, again, building that rapport. And then I've even seen people reach out because, you know, someone who hired the photographer or is shooting at that venue or getting married at that venue, as in like, oh yeah, like we want to reach out to you for video, like, and it's just they may not say it was because they saw it posted, but because I did post that, then it kind of just puts me forward or puts me ahead and whatever in their algorithm, so then they reach out. So it is something that it is a collaborative thing to do, but then also it is also kind of something that reflects back on me to where I can kind of get some further engagement or business from doing that.
Definitely. So I think the biggest takeaway from that is that my collaborative process with you from now on is holding you accountable to being more active on social media so you can get those couples.
Oh man, yeah, I really should be. I'm like, someone will say, "Oh, we saw this video on your page," and I'm like, "Wait, what? That's from like 2021." I look, and it's like literally still like my most recent 9, and I'm like, oh. So I definitely need to be better about that. But I just always feel like there's just so much that I need to be doing and delivering for clients I already have, and I just don't want to be bothered with coming up with a witty caption and all this other stuff. It's the imposter
Definitely.
syndrome, to be honest.
Man, that's why you got to just utilize and lean into AI. I don't think I've written a caption for social media since like January.
Oh
So,
wow, that's
yeah.
awesome.
And we could talk about that maybe in another podcast about
Yeah.
how AI can help wedding professionals with their business after you dive into it for a little bit. But it definitely is a lifesaver, especially where like we're these small business owners. Me, I'm a ship of one sailor. I have my wife who helps me with a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, it's me creating the social media posts. It's me creating the captions. It's me writing blog posts. It's me setting up these podcast interviews and everything that goes along with it. So I feel like this was a really great chat, Brandon. I really appreciate you hopping on. Before we go, I would like to just have you let people know where they can find you. And, maybe it's a couple that's listening in and maybe they want to check out your videography work, or a wedding planner that's listening that might want to, see what your work looks like for their potential couples. Where can the folks find you at?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at B Moye Productions. That's probably the most active I am on social. I have an inactive YouTube channel and all the other Facebook and everything else. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram at B Moye Productions.
And what's your website?
Website is bmoyproductions.com. I do have a lot of work up there for people to check out and contact form if they want to reach out.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate it. And before I let each and every one of you guys go, I did want to mention, if you're a wedding photographer or a wedding photographer that is in need of help with growing their business, I also offer a photography mentorship program called Pathway to Full-Time Photography. If you'd like to find out more information about it, check out the information that is down in the description of this podcast, whether you're listening on Spotify, watching on YouTube, or wherever you take your podcast in. I look forward to hearing from you, and I really appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in for this episode. If you've made it this far, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode.